For months, Yaman had chosen silence. The world around him spoke louder than he ever did, tabloids screamed, fans speculated, social media twisted his every gesture into something it wasn't. He appeared calm, strong, composed, but behind that image, there was a storm waiting to explode. The story began long before the headlines and the chaos. When Can first stepped into the spotlight, he wasn't just another actor, he was fire in motion. His energy, his discipline, his charisma made him unstoppable. Yet, that same light that made him rise also drew shadows. People wanted a piece of him. Some wanted to build him higher, others wanted to tear him down. At first, he didn't care. He thought fame was a test of patience, that if he worked hard, stayed respectful, and avoided drama, the truth would protect him. But he soon learned that fame doesn't play fair. One misunderstanding became a rumor. One rumor became a headline. And before long, the headlines became his reality, even if they were built on lies. They attacked me, he would later say, not with anger but with a painful calm. Not physically, but with words, with judgments, with things that never happened. It started when his relationship with Demet Özdemir, once pure, bright, and full of promise, became public. They were the golden couple of Turkey, the fantasy of millions. But as quickly as love stories rise in the public eye, they also fall. When they grew apart, no one cared to know why. They only wanted someone to blame. And Can, as always, was the easier target. Paparazzi followed him to every city, from Istanbul to Rome, from the film set of El Turco to the quiet cafes where he tried to hide behind dark glasses. Every move, every woman near him, every word he didn't say became a new accusation. Arrogant, cold, ungrateful, changed. The labels never stopped. And still, he said nothing. Because silence was safer. Because no matter what he said, they'd twist it anyway. But deep inside, that silence was killing him. The man who once smiled through everything began to grow distant. His eyes, once full of fire, began to show fatigue. But what nobody knew, what nobody could know, was that while they talked about him, he was rebuilding himself in silence. He was preparing for the moment when he'd finally speak. The moment when, for the first time in years, he would tell the truth not as an actor, not as a celebrity, but as a man. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about peace, about finally putting an end to the noise that surrounded his name. He had been attacked, yes. But he had survived. And now, he was ready to have the last word. The cameras were ready that night. The lights were set. The audience was waiting. Can walked onto the stage of a popular talk show in Rome, a city that had become his second home, wearing a black suit, his hair tied back, his eyes sharp but calm. The host greeted him with the usual charm, but there was tension in the air. Everyone knew why he was there. This wasn't about El Turco. This wasn't about his career. This was about his truth, the one he had held back for far too long. When the host leaned forward and said softly, "Can. Everyone has been waiting for your version of events. What really happened?" The room went silent. Can took a deep breath, looked into the camera, and said, with the kind of quiet power that only comes from pain and healing, "They attacked me. But they forgot one thing, I always have the last word." The audience didn't even breathe. The storm had just begun. The applause that followed his words wasn't loud. It wasn't wild. It was the kind of applause that carried respect. The audience didn't just see a celebrity anymore, they saw a man who had been through hell and was still standing. Ken smiled faintly, but his eyes revealed something else, a mix of exhaustion and quiet defiance. The host leaned back, trying to keep the composure of a professional, but even he couldn't hide the curiosity burning inside him. "Can," he began carefully, "when you say they attacked you, who do you mean exactly? The press? The industry? The people?" Ken took a moment before answering. He wasn't in a rush anymore. For years, he had been forced to answer quickly, to deny, to justify, to explain. But now, he spoke slowly, every word chosen with precision. When you're in the public eye, he said softly, you learn that not everyone who smiles at you is your friend. Some people wait for your weakest moment. Some create it. He paused. His hands rested on his knees, fingers slightly tense. I've been attacked by headlines, yes. By lies. By people who thought they could use my name to sell their stories. But the hardest attacks came from silence. From people I trusted who didn't defend me when I needed them most. The studio was still. The host didn't interrupt. He knew that something deeper was coming. Ken continued, his voice steady but low. There was a time when I believed that if I stayed true to myself, people would see it. That my honesty would speak louder than rumors. But I was wrong. The truth doesn't shout. Lies do. And when lies are repeated enough, people start believing them. The screen behind him showed a montage, flashes of old headlines, paparazzi photos, gossip blogs with sensational titles. Ken Yaman loses control. Set disaster, Can's anger at Demet. Actor caught in new romance. The images blurred together like a nightmare he'd already lived. He turned his eyes toward them, almost like confronting ghosts. You see those? He said quietly. I never even read most of them. But I didn't have to. Because every time I walked into a room, I could feel them on people's faces. Judgments. Doubts. Disappointment. He looked down for a moment, his jaw tightening slightly. And Demet, she suffered too. People didn't just attack me, they attacked what we had. They took something beautiful and turned it into a weapon. They made us strangers in the eyes of people who once called us the perfect couple. There was a murmur in the audience, not gossip, but sympathy. For the first time, people were seeing the cost of fame not in numbers or success, but in the quiet pain behind the scenes. The host finally spoke again. So why now, Ken? Why break your silence after all this time? Ken smiled slightly. Because silence can protect you for a while, but it can also destroy you slowly. I've been silent long enough. I want to tell my truth, so I can finally move on, not to fight anyone, but to breathe again. He looked into the camera once more, and his eyes, though calm, carried that same fire that once made millions fall in love with his performances. I don't need to justify myself anymore. Those who truly know me, know the kind of man I am. And those who don't, never will. But I'm done letting lies define me. The audience erupted in applause, this time louder, fuller. It wasn't for the celebrity Ken Yaman. It was for the human being who had finally found his voice again. As the applause faded, Ken leaned forward slightly, as if sharing a secret. You know, he said with a faint smile, when people attack you, it's usually because they fear your truth. And the moment you start speaking it, they lose their power. The host nodded, visibly moved. And what comes next for you, Ken? He took a deep breath. Peace, he said simply. And a new beginning. But even as he said it, deep inside, he knew, the peace he wanted wouldn't come easily. Because in the world he lived in, every truth comes with a price. And his truth was only starting to surface. What the audience didn't know, what no magazine had ever written, was how the storm really started. The attacks Ken spoke of weren't just random gossip pieces. They were calculated, deliberate moves by people who once sat at his table, who once smiled at him on set, who once called him brother. It began during the golden period of his fame. After a Kenzie cuss, when the world couldn't get enough of him and Demet. Every show, every public appearance, every photo they shared became viral in seconds. But success, as Ken would learn, doesn't only attract fans, it attracts envy. Producers, journalists, even people from his own circle started seeing his name as a tool. If they could attach Ken Yaman to a headline, they'd sell thousands of copies. They didn't care if it was true. They didn't care if it broke something precious. The goal was always attention. At first, Ken tried to laugh it off. He'd send a message to Demet saying, "Ignore it, they'll move on." And she'd reply with that calm strength he admired so much, "We know who we are." That's enough. But it wasn't enough. Because soon, the whispers became daggers. There were stories about his temper on set, completely false, but written so convincingly that even colleagues started questioning him. Someone had leaked private details about his family. Another claimed he'd disrespected crew members. Each week, a new lie was born, and each time he stayed silent, it grew stronger. "They attacked my character," he would later admit. "They wanted to break my name before it became too powerful. They couldn't stand that I was independent." In private, it hurt more than he showed. He'd train longer, work harder, pretending the discipline numbed the pain. Boxing, gym sessions at midnight, long rides through Rome's empty streets. That was how he breathed when words became poison. But the worst blow came when someone he trusted sold him out, leaking conversations, twisting moments, inventing stories about fights that never happened. And through it all, Demet tried to protect him. She avoided interviews, defended him quietly, and kept his secrets safe. But the pressure was too much. Every time she appeared in public, someone would ask, "What happened with Can?" as if love was a crime that needed explanation. The industry began taking sides. Some producers stopped calling him. Others whispered that he was too proud, too difficult. Yet those who truly worked with him knew the opposite, that he was professional, disciplined, and respectful. But in a world ruled by perception, truth often arrives too late. "They didn't just attack me," Can said during that interview, his voice tightening slightly. "They attacked the things I loved most, my work, my peace, my relationships. They made me question who I could trust." One night, when it all became too much, he packed a small bag and left for Italy. No grand plan, no announcement. Just a man running from noise. Rome became his refuge. There, he found silence not as an escape, but as a kind of rebirth. He began studying again, taking Italian lessons, preparing for new roles, and rebuilding his focus. He met people who didn't know him as a tabloid headline, people who saw the man, not the myth. Slowly, he started breathing again. But even there, the past followed him. Reporters would fly from Turkey to Italy, waiting outside his home, chasing him through streets, shouting questions about Demet, about Sarah, about everything except what really mattered. Still, he remained silent. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's power. Every time they expected him to react, he didn't. Every time they wanted a scandal, he gave them calm. That's how he won his battles, quietly. But tonight, on that stage, it was different. He wasn't there to hide anymore. He was there to speak. "I forgave most of them," he said suddenly, surprising even the host. "Because forgiveness isn't about them. It's about me. I couldn't carry their lies forever." He looked down, and for a moment, his voice trembled. "But betrayal," he added, "that's something you never really forget. You just learn to live above it." The studio lights reflected in his eyes. And for the first time, the audience saw not just pain, but pride. The pride of someone who refused to be destroyed by the things meant to break him. He ended that segment with a sentence that would echo through social media for days: "They built stories about me to sell headlines. But I built myself back, without any of them." And with that, the crowd rose to their feet. The man who had once been defined by silence was now rewriting his own story, word by word. When the cameras cut to a commercial break, Ken stayed seated. He didn't check his phone. He didn't talk to anyone. He just sat there, breathing, while the echoes of the audience's applause faded into the distance. The weight of his words was still in the air, heavy, but freeing. For the first time in years, he had spoken without fear. After the show, he walked out into the cool night of Rome. The city lights shimmered against the Tiber River, and for a moment, everything felt still. Reporters were waiting outside, but this time, their questions didn't sting. Because he no longer felt the need to answer them. He had already said everything that needed to be said. They tried to destroy me, he had told the world. But I have the last word. And that word, his truth, had changed everything. In the following days, his statement spread across every media platform. Clips from the interview went viral, translated into different languages, shared by fans who had waited years to hear from him directly. But what surprised everyone most was not what he said, it was how he said it. Calm. Honest. No bitterness, no revenge. Just truth, delivered with the quiet dignity of a man who had survived the fire. The same journalists who once attacked him began to backtrack. Some wrote new articles praising his courage. Others tried to reinterpret their own headlines, pretending they had never doubted him. But Ken didn't care. He wasn't looking for apologies. He had found something more valuable: closure. Rome had become more than just a city for him, it was a second chance. The place where he learned to listen again, to himself, to life, to silence. He'd walk through the narrow streets of Trastevere, no cameras, no noise, just the sound of his footsteps and the warmth of the evening breeze. Locals greeted him not as a superstar, but as Can, the Turkish actor who smiled at children and tipped generously at cafes. He had rebuilt his piece by piece. Acting was still his passion, but now it wasn't about fame. It was about honesty, telling stories that mattered, creating art that healed instead of performed. When he spoke in interviews, he no longer avoided hard questions. He simply answered them without fear. Because when you've been broken and rebuilt, nothing scares you anymore. But there was one question that still followed him, Demet. In that same interview, the host had dared to ask. Can, he said gently, people still wonder about you and Demet. After everything, do you two still talk? Ken smiled. A soft, nostalgic smile. The kind that hides more than it reveals. We shared something beautiful, he said slowly. And beautiful things don't disappear, they just change shape. We may walk different paths now, but respect never fades. That one sentence was enough to melt the internet. Fans replayed it 1,000 times, searching for meaning, for hidden feelings. But Ken didn't explain further. He didn't need to. Some emotions are too sacred to be spoken about, especially when the world has already taken so much from them. The greatest strength, he once said in another interview, is learning to live with your scars and still smile. And that's what he did. Day by day. The people who had attacked him were now silent. The ones who doubted him had nothing left to say. Because when truth finally arrives, it doesn't shout, it simply stands there, undeniable. Months later, he would post a photo on Instagram, just a black and white image of him sitting on a rooftop at sunset, Rome in the background. No caption, no hashtags. Only one simple word in the comments from fans repeated endlessly: respect. In that silence, he found everything he had been searching for. Fame, love, betrayal, pain, all of it had shaped him, but none of it defined him. The boy who once dreamed of acting had become a man who understood that life isn't about what people say behind your back. It's about standing tall when they do. And so, as he looked out over the city that had saved him, he whispered softly to himself, not for the cameras, not for the headlines, but for his own peace, they attacked me, yes. But I forgave them. Because the last word was never theirs. It was always mine. The wind carried his words across the rooftops, fading into the night. The storm was over. And in its quiet aftermath stood a man, stronger, wiser, and finally free.